I'm curious, and I think a lot of Americans are curious too, based on something that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said about these strikes. I want to read a post. The department has spent over 2 decades defending other homelands. Now we're defending our own. These narco-terrorists have killed more Americans than Al-Qaeda, and they will be treated the same. We will track them, we will network them, and then we will hunt and kill them. Is there evidence that every single person that was killed in these strikes, which it's more than 60, are all of those people, were they narco-terrorists? Were they committing a crime? And was that killing justified?
Well, that is what we are. That's what the Congress and the Senate ought to be debating. I mean, you could have, let's presume for a moment that you could have a legal justification to go after drug traffickers. We've obviously got that already. We've got the DEA. We work with other countries in Central America, Mexico, and others to interdict drug traffickers. The idea, though, that we know with 100% certainty that every one of these individuals is a bad actor, I have not been convinced of that. And I think to state otherwise, you've already had an administration that has been caught many times stretching the truth. You already have a Secretary of Defense that has shown, I think, careless disregard of keeping classified information. And so I don't accept that full characterization because I've not seen that full proof. I could accept the fact that there is knowledge that there are drugs on most of these boats. I would still then want to debate whether the best way to deal with that, particularly when we're trying to talk about, public opinion in the region, public opinion amongst Americans, that we ought to be blowing them all up without even any effort to try to interdict them and show the world that we've got this proof.
And I want to talk about some things that happened last week. You and other Democrats were left out of a Republican-only briefing on the strikes. You called this a new low for the Trump administration. You said this was corrosive to democracy and dangerous for our national security. So can you talk about A, what that precedent sets, and then B, what have you learned since then? Because I believe that you said before that you, as well as the Gang of Eight, the rest of the Gang of Eight, got to see what those Republicans saw. So what have you learned, or how much more have you learned since then?
Well, Brittany, one of the things, we've made mistakes in foreign policy over the years. I mean, every American will acknowledge that our record in terms of interventions in Central America and South America has been pretty mixed at best. And the whole way a White House is supposed to operate, when we're talking about national security, when we're talking about putting troops in harm's way, you're supposed to bring in both parties. And frankly, President Trump, in his first term, adhered to those norms. This is so different, this second term of President Trump. It is so not normal. So the idea that, for a number of months, it was not only they didn't brief Democrats, they didn't brief Republicans. And then to have the kind of holy heck moment where after I was promised by Secretary Rubio, who I have great respect for and have worked with and I supported to be Secretary of State, and I still grant him the benefit of the doubt that he didn't know because he promised us these documents, because it was just the appropriate thing. He's been a member of the Gang of Eight. When that didn't happen, he was off traveling the world with the president. When that didn't happen, and then when we found that there was a partisan-only briefing for not even people on the appropriate committees, and I know this sounds like, well, this is just process. No, this is how checks and balances are supposed to work. And I think the administration got caught red-handed. They would never apologize, of course. They did then make it available to the Gang of Eight, and now with enough pressure, frankly, from both sides, to say this is the way we ought to operate. All of the senators will get a chance to get this, at least the legal document, but that is getting the legal document and getting a full briefing on evidence and intelligence about trying to document the claim they're making that everybody on these boats is a bad actor. We still haven't gotten that answer. And again, I think what it ends up doing is I'm sorry, but just one last thing. I think it ends up robbing Americans' confidence. We're all against the drug traffickers, but it robs American confidence that they're doing this in any kind of legal, appropriate way. And that just doesn't help our efforts.
And when do you think you, or at least the Gang of Eight, should have known about this? Was it back in July? Was it before the first strike? I mean, when did you know about this? Did you know about this when everyone else did, when the first strike was announced?
About the time of the strikes, we got some notification, but we immediately asked, and again, both sides asked, all right, when you do this, you've got to have what's called an Office of Legal Counsel, OLC opinion. What is the underlying? This is the same thing you talk about when we, went after the terrorists, Al Qaeda and others. You've got to have some legal justification. We just don't, use military force, particularly when we're talking about not as a one-off. The president does get the leeway. If you hear about a terrorist attack or if an Americans are attacked, the president, doesn't matter which party, often gets the ability to strike back quickly because you can't go through the whole notification process. But when a decision is reached in late July and you've had dozens of strikes and it's late October before you say, here's why we think this is legal. Anybody who thinks that we ought to have rule of law in this country, you ought to be scared. That's not rule of law. That is a White House taking arbitrary action on their own. And that's how America gets itself in trouble. We think back again, how an administration corrupted intelligence about the initial war with Iraq. Do we really want to engage in something that, again, put our troops in harm's way without some underlying legal document and without some sign off from Congress?